Mark Gilderhus, who is a history professor, wrote an introductory to history textbook that's used in dozens of universities in North America. Here's what he says. The body of literature on almost any historical subject takes the form of an ongoing debate. By the very nature of the subject, history tends to divide scholars and set them at odds. We no longer possess a past commonly agreed upon. Indeed, to the contrary, we have a multiplicity of versions competing for attention and emphasizing alternatively elites and non-elites, men and women, whites and persons of color, and no way of reconciling all the differences. Chris Lorenz, a historian who writes for History and Theory, says discussions of historical reconstruction seldom lead to a consensus, and that therefore pluralism is a basic characteristic of history as a discipline. So this consensus simply isn't required, even in non-religious matters such as they're talking about here. So of course they're not going to be required with religious matters. And if we're talking about what he just said here, a Muslim could never agree that Jesus died by crucifixion because their theology won't allow them to, just as an atheist philosophy won't allow them to acknowledge a resurrection. Now, in terms of Mike being biased, yes, I'm biased. But that's why I described 4 speed bumps that I take along the way, checks that I put to manage and minimize the impact of my own horizon. So the question isn't this evening whether Mike Licona is biased. We all are. The question is what arguments Bart and I have used tonight to support our positions, and which arguments are the best ones, which positions supported best. He says, he asked which of the 2 of our approaches are historical. Well, I asked which of us has presented their historical method and based their case on that method rather than theology. He says the evidence that Jesus was raised, there's not evidence just because Jesus died. Well, like anything else, with this evidence of the crucifixion and the appearances, you have to form hypotheses to explain these phenomena. And the best hypothesis is what you determine what happened. Sabbatai Savi, no, this doesn't prove his claims to be true, but the difference is the Muslims said that we would torture you to death unless you did convert, and he did. That's evidence that he wasn't who he claimed to be if he was the true Messiah and a prophet. Paul, on the other hand, converted and then was tortured and submitted to torture because of his belief. He said, you can do whatever you want. I believe he rose and appeared to me personally. According to the apparitions, he said the empty tomb lurking behind it. Well, I do believe in the empty tomb, but I don't see it lurking behind it. What I meant by that, to clarify, is that bodily resurrection is consistent with an empty tomb, of course, and both Bart and I agree that Paul did believe that Jesus was raised in his transformed physical corpse. So now I just conclude with a story, and that is about 20 years ago. My wife and I lived in Northern Virginia, and my brother-in-law, Terry, who's here this evening, came and visited us. And one evening we went up to Washington, D.C., which is close by, and we took a ride. We tried to go down Embassy Row because that's where all the embassies to the U.S. are lit up. And you remember that, Terry? They're lit up and they're beautiful. Well, I was driving and we got lost and ended up in a bad section of town. And contrary to the stereotypical male, I pulled into a gas station to ask for directions. Well, it was one of those places where you have a thick bulletproof window that you had to pay the attendant from. So I got out of the car and walked up toward the window, but before I could get there, I was approached by 5-6 guys standing there in the parking lot. And they said, can we help you with something? And I said, yeah, I'm looking for Embassy Row. The guy who was the apparent leader of the group gave me directions, which were almost certainly wrong, but I realized we were in danger at that point. So I said, hey, thanks, appreciate it, started to walk away. But before I could get 2 steps away, the guy said, hey, wait a minute. I gave you directions, now you give me money. And at that point, the other 5-6 guys surrounded me. Well, I knew I was in danger, but I was a 2nd-degree black belt in Taekwondo at the time, had my own martial arts studio. I was in my 20s, thought myself invincible. So I took a step toward the guy, looked him right in the eye and said, not tonight, gentlemen. Well, often in the world of scholarship, those who investigate Jesus' resurrection gets surrounded by other scholars who say, hand over your evidence for the resurrection. We don't use that in our hood. Well, this evening I've shown that we can use it and conclude that Jesus rose from the dead. So I'm not handing it over. Not tonight, gentlemen.
God, I wish I had a nice story to end with. Mike has cited a number of experts on history as to support his various points of view. This is a very common way of proceeding when talking about one's perspective. I want to just kind of stress a subsidiary point, which is that I hope that you all, as we say where I live, you all, I hope you all realize that expert opinion is opinion. Mike's opinions are his opinions, my opinions are my opinions, the people he quoted are their opinions. Opinions are not evidence. Expert opinions are not evidence. 2,000 years ago, if you would have asked the scientific experts about the solar system, you would have gotten a particular point of view. The fact that it was an expert opinion has nothing to do with the reality of the case. You yourself have intelligence, and you should use your intelligence to weigh the pluses and minuses of what we've been talking about. Mike has stressed, rightly so, that there are data in history and that you need hypotheses to explain them. The reality is you don't need the hypothesis of the resurrection to explain the three data that he continually has stressed. You don't need a resurrection to explain that Jesus was crucified. He was crucified whether or not he was raised from the dead. The crucifixion is not evidence of a resurrection. The visions that his disciples had need to have some kind of hypothesis, and I've given you one. Namely, that people often have visions of people, of those who have died that they're close to and that they love and that are dear to them. Mike acknowledges that that happens. It may have happened in the time of Jesus. It may have happened to his disciples. That at least is plausible. It's a historical hypothesis that I have. Is it more probable than the hypothesis of the resurrection? Well, historically speaking, yes, it's more plausible and more probable because we know this sort of thing happens all the time. So if you're just talking in terms of probabilities, it's the more probable hypothesis. Does the conversion of Paul require the resurrection of Jesus? No, it requires that Paul came to think that Jesus got raised from the dead. That's historically certain, I think, that Paul thought that Jesus got raised from the dead. Yes, that's certain. Was Paul historically right? We have no historical grounds for saying that Jesus was raised. He may have been raised, he may not have been raised. What we're asking is whether history can demonstrate it. And the reality is that it can't, simply because of the nature of the case. The sources for Jesus' resurrection are not eyewitness accounts. They're accounts that were written decades after the fact by people who were not there to see these things happen. The stories they tell about Jesus' resurrection and his life were changed year after year, decade after decade, as they were told or retold. These stories are not internally consistent with one another. They have discrepancies among them so that they're not the kind of sources that historians look for when they're looking for reliable historical sources. The accounts of the resurrection embody faith claims of those who are telling the stories. They're not disinterested. These kinds of sources have to be used very carefully by historians in trying to figure out what really happened. There are some things we can say for certain really happened, I think. I think we can say for certain that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate, that he was crucified. Certainly we can say that. Can we say that he was resurrected? The problem is that historians cannot establish miracles as having happened because miracles are not probable events. They wouldn't be miracles if they were probable. They're highly improbable. That's why we call them miracles. But historians can only deal with what probably happened. Jesus may have been raised from the dead, and many of you, most of you, think that he was. But the reason you think he was is not because there's historical evidence. The reason you think he was is because you've had some experience of Jesus in your life, and the way you explain that is on the basis of his having been raised from the dead.